Thank you so much. Thanks so much. And it's absolutely wonderful to be here in Scottsdale, Arizona, with so many bright sparks and big thinkers about the world of global mobility. And as you can tell, I'm a Brit, but I'm actually Canadian as well. I moved to Canada in 2008. I was actually used mobility services to move myself from Reading at that point in time all the way through to Vancouver, British Columbia, Canada. I now reside in Toronto. I run the Futurist.com think tank, and I've worked with over 450 companies over the years to talk about futures thinking, what's happening in the next 5, 10, 20 plus years. How can we take some new ideas of what's going to come next and really supercharge our strategic thinking? And that's what we're trying to do here today with this particular keynote as well. Now, my story starts off back in the UK, and I grew up in a very small village. I grew up in a 4,000 person village. There was a slaughterhouse in the center of town, which was fun. My father used to manage that, and then he ended up working in the dairy industry for a number of years, and that was kind of my trajectory into the world of work in a way. But something changed fundamentally for me at the age of 8 years old. My father bought me this book. This is the Osborne Book of the Future. What's the world going to be like in the year 2000 and beyond? Now, this was in 1979, so the ideas were that we were going to be living on the moon, living under the ocean, where everyone was going to have robots at home, super smart homes, and fundamentally we were going to have things like smartwatches on our wrists. Now, I've kind of got a smartwatch on my wrist, and we've got smartphones in our pocket, so some of the things weren't so far-fetched. But these big ideas of what was going to come next, all the hype of technology, and we see these dominant narratives around us about this is going to change everything. Stop now, you've got to invest. If you don't get on, people are going to get on before you, your company's going to be completely disrupted. That's not quite how it plays out. And we know that that's not quite how it plays out. So I try and shift ourselves away from looking at these hype cycles, and we see tons of them around right now, and we've got to cut through the noise. In fact, that's what we do as smart strategic humans. And I like to cut from hype to hope. Now, I call myself a hope engineer as much as I call myself a futurist. And that comes from over 30 years at the coalface of data and analytics and AI. I did AI in the 90s at university, cutting through. But what I found is that modern theories of hope and my psychology background as well showed me that we can set these big, audacious goals, find the pathways forward, but then give agency to people and partners and friends to really realize our goals and what we need to have happen. And this idea of being a hope engineer, an idea that hope is going to drive us forward, isn't just a folly. It's not just, hope is not a strategy. Actually, hope is something that's a fuel. It's an energy for change. Hope for a better world in our futures, and also hope to have the actions to take place today in the partnerships and ecosystems within we work as well. So hope as an energy is a really important thing to bear in mind as we drive forward towards these hopeful possible futures that fundamentally are going to reshape our world. And what I do as a futurist is 4 fundamental things. And I run a think tank that's based with consultants all over the world. The first thing we do is we look, and this has already been spoken about today, we look at the signals of change. And we gather thousands of signals of change that indicate that something is going to happen and something is going to fundamentally shift how we work. It might be some technology, it might be a cultural change, it might be a new business model, it might be a pandemic. Let's not have one of those for a while, right? But all of these things come together, and as they start to interact, we step into the second part of what we do as futurists, is that we start to see emerging trends. Positive and challenging and sometimes mundane trends that fundamentally change how we work. And the third part is where we start to see the dynamics of change. And this is all about scenario planning and scenarios. What if in 2035 we see these people, these places, these systems, these cultural shifts, these products, these services change, the dynamics? How does that play out? Those dynamics are incredibly valuable from a strategic planning perspective. In fact, companies that do this work of the signals and the trends and the scenario planning are more vigilant. And it's actually been found that they're more profitable, they grow faster than other companies, they've got higher market cap by like 200% versus those that don't do it. You're either part of a future state of the world and you can define what you are within that world, or you're a passive observer, and the futures are going to be affected onto you. Right? So the value of futures is to step forward and to be dynamically involved. And that brings us to the fourth piece, and I'm going to sort of round off the keynote in a while by talking about storytelling. And why is storytelling really important? Well, it really brings you into the moment. It deepens your connection with that future state of the world. Whilst the dynamics within sort of the strategic planning can help us understand how things move around, the inputs and the outputs and transformations, the stories help us feel what a future is like. When you can feel what a future is like, it becomes a lot more real for you, and you can take strategic direction from that. But we're going to have some fun, and we're going to look at some of that a little later on. Now, I talk about the value of futures thinking, and I like to give an example from the real world by looking back at something that happened that sort of shaped the world that we're in. And I'm going to talk about the world's greatest technology futurist that you've probably never heard of. And I ask all my audiences, who's heard of Douglas Engelbart? Anyone in the audience? So Douglas Engelbart left the Navy at the end of the Second World War. He's an electrical engineer, incredibly smart guy. He thought, the military-industrial complex of computing seems interesting. He started reading articles by people like Vannevar Bush and whatever about the MEMEX and the idea that these could be used for augmenting human capabilities. So Douglas Engelbart got a bunch of money from NASA, he got a bunch of money from Stanford, and he set up the Department of Human Augmentation. We've talked about augmentation today. It's common today. Well, this is ground zero. This is some footage from a demonstration called the Mother of All Demos that happened in December 1968 in front of about 1,000 people in San Francisco. Now, Douglas and his team over a number of years had invented a number of pivotal inventions and early versions of personal computing in a system that he called very catchily the online system. He invented the mouse, touchpads, hypertext linking, early versions of the internet. They had to build new kinds of modems to connect Stanford to downtown San Francisco for this demonstration. Editable documents, video conferencing. Still kind of looks like what video conferencing is today, right? This is over 50 years ago. Still tough, still difficult to do. Now, you can go and see this full demonstration online at YouTube. It's about an hour and a half long. It's a very charismatic guy. But, 1,000 people stood up. They applauded. They couldn't believe what they saw. I mean, the system was shaky. It wasn't perfect. But it really showed us a new way of human augmentation. And Douglas Engelbart and his team went back to their research and got on with the work. Now, over the years, there was a number of other companies that had sort of seen this and developed the technology a little bit further. You've probably heard of Xerox. And Xerox PARC, Palo Alto Research Center, they developed the ideas of the mouse, object-oriented programming, graphical user interfaces, and built this. This is the Xerox Alto, the world's first proper personal computer. About $35,000 US in the mid-70s. So not many people bought them, if any. There was a lot of demonstrations, though. Now, the Xerox leadership were obviously focused on the future, but their future was better copiers, better printers, not personal computing. They were kind of excited by this, and they did tons of ideas in the Xerox PARC, but like the personal computing that they really looked at didn't really excite them that much. Who was going to have a personal computer at home or in their office, right? Anyway, the team was passionate about this. They did dozens of demonstrations and thousands of demonstrations over the years. And one day, a young development team came in Silicon Valley, and they saw something that they couldn't believe. And the spark of the idea aligned with what they were thinking about the future of personal computing. Now, what was really interesting about that was that they went back and they went to see their CEO, and they said, "You need to see this. This is amazing." And they described all of these amazing ideas, and the CEO wasn't that excited either. But the next day, they managed to drag their CEO in the room, and this is what he had to say about that demonstration.
What we saw was incomplete. They'd done a bunch of things wrong, but we didn't know that at the time. It's still, though, they had the germ of the idea was there, and they'd done it very well. And within, 10 minutes, it was obvious to me that all computers would work like this.
Now, that's a pretty big realization, right? So we all know who Steve Jobs is, yes? And it breaks my heart that no one knows who Douglas Engelbart is. But what's really interesting here is that Steve went to the board of directors of Xerox and said, we love these ideas. With a small company called Apple, we're building personal computing. We'd like to take some of these ideas, develop them further. Can we give you some shares? And they cut them about 100,000 shares. I hope Xerox has still got them. And for Apple. Anyway, what was really interesting was, over the years, they sort of reinvented things. They took some of the ideas about graphical user interfaces and the mouse and a number of other things, and a number of other tech companies out in the world did the same. But Apple sort of got ahead of the game. But what's really interesting about this is the signals and the trends sort of really came from thinking about new use cases. The scenarios came from Steve Jobs thinking about how creativity was going to change the world and liberate ourselves from the mundanity of the day-to-day work that we have. And we know that Apple is synonymous with creativity and thinking differently. But what's really interesting about this is really stepping up and really telling the story. So in secret, Steve Jobs went up to a director called Ridley Scott, who'd just made a movie called Blade Runner, and a great creative director out of California called Lee Clow from Charted Day. And they developed an ad. 41 years ago at the Super Bowl, they released the famous 1984 Apple ad. You've probably seen it. Now, the Super Bowl wasn't that exciting that year, but the ad got everyone jazzed. Now, it traveled around the world, all the earned media, everyone was talking about it. And what was really interesting about the ad, if you look at it again, it didn't feature the computer. It told a story about liberation from mundanity and creativity and breaking the system and being something new with the Macintosh, right? And what was interesting about that is that the board of directors of Apple went absolutely ballistic. You spend how many $1 million on something that doesn't show the computer that we're selling? Now, what was interesting about this was the story about Xerox and Apple in the situation, having that future vision of looking at the signals and the trends and the scenarios and the stories. And what this did, not only for Apple as a company, but the entire world and a number of industries and other competitors to Apple as well, and what they did. You know, famously, Apple and Microsoft and the whole graphical user interface Windows revolution came from this as well. That tension actually created something great. Now, I just checked the market cap of Xerox. It was about $488 million. The market cap of Apple, $3 trillion. Futures thinking, right? Now, 50 years. How do you have commitment? You have to have commitment, you have to have belief, you have to have drive, you have to have a ton of cash, right, to get there. So it's not as simple as sort of stepping forward. But what is simple within the world of work and what you do strategically is the ability to ignite your imagination to see outside of the lines, to really build anticipation for what comes next so you can be prepared for what comes, right? Because the signals and the trends indicate what's coming, and the dynamics within the scenarios tell us how that's going to play out potentially. And the deepening of empathy with the people we work with and the people we serve and the ecosystem as a whole. And very simply what I do is I teach people how to shift their mindsets from what is to what if. This is the most potent question you can ask in business. Here comes some new technology, here comes a competitor. What if that disrupts our business or business line? What if that creates efficiency more than we can create? What if we disrupt ourselves? This is a question about curiosity and about going deeper. And if I leave you with anything, is the drive to ask what if every single day is going to be an absolute differentiator in what you do. Okay, so having talked about the stories of Apple and Xerox and Doug Engelbart and a number of other things, sort of shows us the power of futures thinking. And what I'm going to do in this keynote is really show you some of those signals of change in the trend areas that we're going to look at, and really ask some poignant what-if questions as well. And we're going to start off by looking globally at what's happening in the world, not only of mobility, but outside and the implications. Now, there's going to be some economic shifts over the next decade or so. And people are saying that, China's going to be number one economic power, USA number two, India number three. And we've certainly seen some evidence from earlier presentations today about the economic power and the shifts and the growth of mobility in India. Carlin talked about moving to Indonesia. Now, Indonesia is a real powerhouse, so they're going to be coming in at number 4 with Germany at number 5. What's more interesting to me than this pecking order of economic power, which can chop and change, is that potentially we're going to have new reserve currencies coming in. That globalization is sort of getting a little bit fractured and distant. We're going to have people working in the digital yuan, the digital dollar, and also the digital euro, with central banking digital currencies. So we're going to start to see new ways of working. And whilst we have to process all the different currencies around the world, there's going to be some kind of consolidation happening. And that's what I think is really interesting to think about, to be prepared for. We also need to be prepared for massive growth in parts of the world that we didn't really expect it before. Sub-Saharan Africa is going to be absolutely exciting and dynamic, and the growth is going to be incredible. It's going to be 4.2 billion people living in sub-Saharan Africa by 2100. 88 million people are going to live in Lagos, Nigeria by 2100. Nigeria is going to be about 400 million people by the mid-2030s. That's bigger than the States. If you've ever worked with Africans, they're the most powerfully intellectual, inventive, incredible business folks that I've ever worked with in my entire career. And what's also interesting about this is that Southeast Asia is also growing as well. And what's interesting about this is when we start to look at the working age of folks around the world, the people that are going to be moving in our businesses over the next 10 to 20 years are not necessarily going to be within our countries. They're going to be coming from places like Africa and Southeast Asia, both within their regions and countries close to them, and also to places like the UK and Australia and the US and Canada. And it's interesting to see how the world is changing, because we're not growing our populations. It's all about immigration. It's all about change. That is going to be the lifeblood of the growth of companies around the world. But when I was doing this research, and I do custom research for every client, I was like, how are we going to fill the gaps? Not all these people are going to universities. Well, there's massive growth in online courses, MOOCs, right? Over 35% year on year, compound annual growth rate through 2029. The industry is growing massively. This is Coursera and Khan Academy and a number of other things. But what's interesting, when I really dug deep into this data, it's where's the biggest growth within those platforms? How many people are you hiring from Paraguay, Lebanon, Philippines, Guyana, Kenya, Ethiopia, Rwanda, Vietnam, and Kazakhstan? Where are we finding this talent? One of the best DevOps guys, when I ran a software company in Canada, was from Kazakhstan. He was incredible. One of the best in the world that I'd ever seen do that work. So the talent is more spread around the world than maybe we've been looking for. And there's a huge opportunity to tap into this talent with a huge amount of growth. This is about 4.1 million people total of people that are growing by doing online courses and learning in whole new ways, right? We know that we've seen this as an indicator, as a signal that people are going online to do their education. We're going to see more people coming from places that we don't necessarily expect them to come from. And it's interesting. There was a lot better graphs earlier in terms of what Server was presenting in terms of where people are moving, whatever. But I was wondering, where are people going? Where do people want to go? And you can sort of see, we've ended up in the pecking order in 2023: Australia, USA, Canada, UK, Germany. In the last 3 months, I just think that we're in a situation where we just don't know. And I'm not. That's no disrespect to any country at all. It's just that the world order does get shifted. And do you know what? And I say this to my friends who talk about disruption on stage. We don't really like disruption when it happens, right? But when it comes, boy, does it make us think about the changes and what's going to happen. So we don't quite know the pecking order and what's going to happen. We know that immigration is going to be a big deal. And specialists that are able to be agile and to move quickly and to make good, solid decisions for you and with you, right? I can't talk about global dynamics without talking about climate change. I mean, it's really interesting when you look at what's happening in the world, and there's been a lot of discussions about what is real and what is not real. the truth of the matter is this, and these are the warming stripes from Ed Hawkins at the University of Reading in the UK. This is 1850, and at the very top is 2024. And each of these slices is 1 year average temperature. The fact is, the world is getting warmer, the weather is getting so very interesting, and I do about 70 flights a year. Trust me, I feel like I experience it very viscerally, right? But the world is getting warmer in the post-industrial era. The decarbonization of the world is a big topic, and also understanding how we can do the business and mobility in the most responsible way is going to be of utmost importance, especially when we have sustainability targets, right? But the biggest companies that we're going to become and move into and also see grow in the world are going to be around water, energy, and food. The water, energy, food nexus is linked, and it has impacts on a local, country, and global level. In fact, 95% of electricity generation is going to be affected by water scarcity, and a third of the food that we need to grow is going to be affected as well. So there are some linkages in this overall ecosystem and this world of work, and every company is going to have a strategy around water, energy, and food going forward. So the specialisms around that and the people that we need to bring to our companies to really help us be sustainable are going to be in high demand. Now, you might have seen this before. This is the Sustainable Development Goals from the UN. And there's a number of different pillars here around reduced inequalities, life below water, life on land, gender equality, and such like. But it's interesting. Over the last year or so, I've managed to travel and meet a number of different people that work in the mobility industry that are having big conversations, not only from a cost perspective, but from a sustainability perspective. In fact, just even focusing on a number of these can actually, increase your profit and increase your ability to be more resilient. But there are big conversations around companies that set carbon budgets, that once they exceed those budgets, i.e. people traveling around or mobility happening with certain emissions, no more movement. In fact, I was just in Paris last year, and there were the largest companies in Europe talking about how by around about October, they just stop all travel and they just stop all mobility. So this is about sustainability. This is also about creating equality and equity for the people in our organizations, but overall sustainability. This is where new technologies around renewable energy and low emission fuels and the such like really come into the mix as well. Specialisms around that are going to be important in mobility. But we're going to end up in a world where we've got a whole new dynamic of geopolitics in a way. So by around about 2050, 2060, we're going to have a global energy supergrid, the Internet of Energy. We're going to have hubs of renewable energy production, and we're going to have buildings like the Phoenician producing all of its energy, right, and storing all of its energy off-grid, and you're going to have a whole new way of working out how to power the world, because the electrification of the world has begun, and the growth is incredible. The biggest growth to capacity is solar and battery right now. And I don't think that's changing, no matter what decisions are being made today on what's happening with fossil fuels and oil and such like. So we're going to have to have experts on this side of things as well. So what if we anticipate the effects of global shifts and dynamics? What if we reflect some of these insights today, some of these signals that we see against the strategies that we're undertaking? And ask yourself the question, are we focused enough on the things that are going to matter in the next 5 to 10 years in these areas? Okay. Contractually, I'm obliged to talk about AI, so this is the AI section. Now, I mentioned earlier, I got into AI in the 90s. I was quite highfalutin, and I thought maybe it can do something with language and grammar and the such like. It didn't work very well. So I kind of argued that grammar didn't exist. That didn't go down very well. And then we had big conversations. But it sort of took me along on this journey of data and data centers and analytics and business intelligence throughout my career. That threw me into advertising. That threw me into software companies. And it's really been the basis of what I do as a futurist as well. And really, the mastery of data is what we're all about, right? Carolyn already spoke about this, but by 2050, there's going to be 1,000 times more data created every single year. Now, we're not going to capture all that data, but there's going to be a huge amount of value in that data. We're going to tap into that using machine learning, artificial intelligence. In fact, we're going to be going through the whole cycle of gathering data, turning it into information, and making that useful, adding a narrative, it becomes knowledge. But I think that what's most important about this room and this conference and the ecosystem of Server is the partners, the clients, the teams. It's all about the wisdom economy. The stories that we share about success and challenge define our trajectory forward, and it actually drives us forward faster than just crunching the data, right? So that's really, really important, and it's quite poignant to think about that as we go through, because the decisions that we make are so important on a daily basis. Now, that was my son Max. He's four and a half. We drove a Waymo. Hands up who drove a Waymo. Isn't that mad? There's like 700 Waymos in Scottsdale. Anyway, I took this video, and we went to the zoo the other day. Very cool. And anyway, I took this quick footage. This is sped up, so this isn't as fast as they drove. But I was chatting to a friend about Waymo. He lives in San Francisco. They've had self-driving cars for years. He says, isn't it boring? Isn't it normal? It kind of looks strange on the streets, but this is AI in action, and it's just become commonplace. Now, on the flip side, we're having people building humanoid robots that potentially help us, do daily chores, right? I always say to someone that wants a robot in their house, do you want to move an extra person in to your home? Do you have room for that? Great if you do, but most people don't. But this is a company out of Canada called Sanctuary AI, and this robot is just doing normal, mundane things. The future in technology and AI is kind of mundane, kind of normal, and integrated into our work. There's been a huge amount of hype about how the world is changing, how many millions of jobs are disappearing and the such like. I don't believe it. At no point in time has a piece of technology been introduced and hundreds of millions of jobs been disappeared, right? I just don't get it. I mean, if you look at farming as an example, in 1900, 40% of Americans worked on farms. It's less than 3% today. So have all those jobs just disappeared? No, new jobs have turned up, new tasks, new kinds of technology, new ways of working, new business models, right? But there's going to be huge benefits in terms of growth. I mean, people are actually thinking there's going to be over $17 trillion added to the global GDP from AI, because we're going to be able to squeeze more value out of the data and decisions and the work that we can do. But there's still this narrative saying that 40% of jobs around the world will be affected. Now, the word affected is really important because they're not replaced. I mean, hands up who thinks their job's been affected by ChatGPT already or something similar. It's just made you a little faster, a little better. I use it for doing some scenario planning. I use it for some research. I use it for about 20% of the things that I do. I don't think it's an 80% solution or a 100% solution. But the world is sort of moving forward. AI today is the worst that it's ever going to be, right? And we have to talk about generative intelligence, and we have to talk what's being delivered to us from, Claude and Gemini, ChatGPT, and all these other platforms that we use. It has been found to give us productivity, but we have to be careful because it's still derivative, still platforms, it's still actually creating some data that doesn't truly exist, that it hallucinates, that it fundamentally affects our critical thinking and quality. So right now, we're in businesses where great to be productive, not so great to be less critical and less quality driven. Doesn't mean don't use the technology. It means we just have to have some checks and balances, and we have to augment our capabilities, right? We're becoming superhumans through this technology, and if used responsibly, that does shift the dial a little bit in our businesses. And there's a huge amount of impact that can be had on industries like banking, insurance, software and platforms, energy, retail, and the such like. High potential for augmentation, low potential for augmentation. There's opportunities for us to step into. Now, it's been interesting over the last 2 to 3 years talking about this. I was way more skeptical 3 years ago. And having followed through AI and some of the ethics behind the data that we use, it was very questionable. A lot of these things are being worked out, but it's happening quickly, and we have to pay attention. But the thing that's being spoken about more than anything else in technology today is around agentic AI. The idea that you actually can create these AI agents that can have their own memory of what's happened before in the organization, with the tools and the goals, and it can actually build their own capabilities. Fully augmented parts of your augmentation, doing accounting, doing planning, doing invoicing, doing a number of other things as well. And people are bullish, right, in technology. Mostly the people that want you to invest in their company, right? So 12x market growth for autonomous AI and agents to 58 billion by 2030. Yes. But what's really interesting about this, that people are experimenting with this. Now, there's a Minecraft movie out right now, and there have been some companies that have been doing some experimentation with AI, and they've started off by building communities from scratch, and all of these people in Minecraft are just these agentic AI individuals, and they built community, they built the economy, they built the interactions, they've built influence. And they've run this many different times through political scenarios, through investment scenarios. They've got, they find that school teachers and priests and a number of other people have become the most influential in the community because of the goals that they have, right? And what's really interesting when we think about this is that you can run these simulations and suddenly you can have fully autonomous organizations. A lot of people are speculating, when's the world's first AI CEO going to exist? That's not quite going to play out that way. But are there going to be capabilities within critical functions that might run fully autonomously with some human oversight? Yes. Does that mean that we'll have less people? No. We'll have more people giving oversight and a much greater capacity for growth, right? And Mark Benioff really summarizes it well, where we are and where we're likely to go.
We are the last CEOs who are only going to be managing humans as our workforce. That from this point forward, this is the marking, that we will be managing not only human workers, but also digital workers. That's just fascinating to me, that we are at that moment that we're going to say, yeah, this is when humans and AI are working together to create a higher level of success.
And that's it. Finally, we've got the narrative of understanding that it's human and the machine, and it's human first. Our creativity, our inventiveness, the ability to be strategic is augmented by these capabilities. In fact, as we move from our transactional capabilities, relational understanding and expertise, we're sort of moving into productivity gains built by augmented human work and substituted work and new kinds of tasks that really release the value that we bring to an organization, right? At the same time, there's something that we need to be really careful of, and I call it cognitive outsourcing. Now, just to give a demonstration of this, I talk about an art activist out of Berlin called Simon Verkart. A few years ago, Simon Verkart, he came to a realization that people had a big reliance on Google Maps. Hands up who uses Google Maps when they drive, right? So what he did was he got a little red wagon, and he put 99 smartphones in that red wagon, and he connected them all to Google Maps. So he had the equivalent of 99 cars in Berlin in his little red wagon, and he slowly walked over the Bridge of the Spree and caused massive traffic jams in other parts of Berlin. As you can see from the footage, he's just walking around, and other people are like, what's going on? What's happening? This was called the Google Maps hack experiment. What was fascinating about this was it showed us that we're so willing to cognitively outsource to potent technology that we take some of the sensibility and common sense out of our lives. Hands up who's ever ignored Google Maps and regretted it. But this is a question. We have to be very careful about what we choose to put our cognitive tasks into and how much faith that we give it and how much that we can lean on that. And stories like Simon Verkart still walking around for 2 hours and hitting the news out there are sort of poignant there. He's like, there's a car. Independent human in the car. I don't use smartphones. But this is also about the tools and the opportunities that we have in our organizations as well. We might have seen in the last couple of years things like the Project Aria, which became Orion last year, coming out from Meta. We're no longer going to be tethered to the rectangles in our pockets. We're going to be wearing normal kinds of glasses that are going to have data in front of us, providing useful information and knowledge and prompts and an ability, right? Superhuman capability. In the 90s, we thought that mobile phones and smartphones were never going to be that dominant. We're kind of at that same point here. 20 years' time, we're going to be wearing glasses, we're going to be seeing an overlay of data, but what could that world look like? There's a guy called Keiichi Matsuda out of the UK. He's a designer, amazing guy. He did a project called Hyperreality. He went down to Medellin in Colombia, and what he did, he took some footage and then he built visions of what augmented reality could look like. Now, it was based on all the patents that are coming out from amazing designers and inventors around what that world could look like. A fully gamified world, where we're immersed in this whole new reality of thinking, a street that's just full of opportunities for learning about something or gaining some utilitarian information, something that's actually providing us with some safety, but something that's fundamentally like strapping New York Times Square to your face, right? So it's also like a warning. When you do some storytelling with futures work, it's a warning about what could come next. But then he looked at a number of different situations, and what would that look like if suddenly we go to a supermarket and we were to play a game around buying bananas and other fruits and vegetables as well. If your kids play Pokemon Go today, this is kind of what it's like already, right? We're already seeing indications of this as well. Now, this isn't a reality. This is something that's just a bit of a warning about what comes next. And that's really important, I think, in futures work as well. But like exploring these ideas, it's like, oh, the skill set to build this hardware is going to be incredible. And who do we find to hire? The skill set to build these kinds of ecosystems is incredible. And who do we find to hire as well, right? And these new ecosystems are going to be exciting. I think we were looking at a list of the fastest growing industries, and finance was in there as well. Well, suddenly think of this ecosystem of internet, mobile, e-commerce, and payments, and social media, video games, and virtual worlds. We don't say the metaverse anymore. Virtual reality, augmented reality, and central banking digital currency, and crypto seems to be on a run right now as well. Who's going to be building this? The biggest companies in the world, super apps, super platforms, new ways of working. We need those people. And again, it was heartening to see that you had technology and energy at the top of that list as well. There's a huge amount of growth of data centers. There's about 12,000 data centers in the world right now. In the US alone, there's over 5,300. And that's probably going to double in the next 5 years. And if you just look at the US as an example, and we've already seen the global energy supergrid, we know this is going to happen around the world. Data centers and energy hubs are going to go together like cheese and pickle, as we say in the UK. Right? So you're going to be hiring whole new skill sets. And also, with all of these technological ecosystems and wonders, we're going to have to consider cybersecurity very carefully as well. We know that China, Iran, North Korea, and Russia are going to be still causing problems. They actually think that we're going to need about 10 million people in cybersecurity in the next couple of years. There's only 5.5 million people in that discipline right now. So again, one of those huge growth areas like technology and data, augmented reality, and a whole number of different areas. And really that made me think, and I was looking at a number of stories around the world of entire teams and entire companies being acquired and being moved in bulk, right? We're not talking about teams of 3 or 4, we're talking about teams of 20 or 30 or 40 or maybe more, entire families. That's like the hockey stick growth that we're looking for, right? But it's also incredibly complex, incredibly difficult to manage, and we have to consider it incredibly carefully. So what if we explore how new tech ecosystems influence organizational growth? But beyond technology, beyond AI, and beyond those large global megatrends, we have to think about the thriving workforce and how that's going to shift over time. Now, all sorts of new jobs are going to be coming up. And it's interesting, vibe coders, people that just feel how an application should be using Gen AI, automation and sensor fusion specialists, people building fully automated systems like Waymo, technology ethicists. We spoke about ethics earlier. Ethics is going to be a core capability. And then really thinking about the core of technology and the labor market, work and workers. And this is from McLean, and this is a report that I fed into last year as well. And they were looking at all these different needs and wants and demands that we have from employees. Well-being, collaboration, leadership, solid mission, vision and values, employee development, organizational design. And over on top of that as well, the idea that we need to develop new kinds of skills in strong ways. Cognitive skills around creative thinking, analytical thinking, technological literacy in a world that is becoming technologically more complex, and then also thinking about self-efficacy, curiosity, lifelong learning, resilience, flexibility, and agility. These are going to be the things that we're going to have to find people to really step up into. These are going to be the education programs we offer to attract people into our organizations as well. But also, there are some fundamentals, from reading out there, things like kindness and safety, fairness and compassion, structure with freedom as well, and also life-work balance. How many people feel uncomfortable at this last one, right? Because we're in a world, we like to work hard, we like to build families, and we like to build friendships. But like all of these things are sort of starting to be turned on their head a little bit as Gen Z sort of comes into the workforce. We've got amazing places to work now. This is NVIDIA's HQ. I got to go here in 2019. Very lucky, incredible HQ. They've got all the money. But it's incredible. They've got an Irish pub in the top of the building, and they've got it because the old CTO used to be sober, and the CEO didn't really like the idea that they couldn't have drink parties there. But nomadic workers, we started to see these, things like the Wi-Fi tribe and people traveling around the world together and working. Things like spaces. I'm a member of this. I've got an office in Toronto, but I've got access to something like 3,800 different locations around the world, full flexibility. This is how the organizations are going to be working. People are going to be moving. So what does mobility look like when people don't stop moving, right? It's interesting questions. Plus also, if we're hiring the best talent, how do we treat that person and how do we empower them? There's a company out of Washington State called Valve. If you ever played Half-Life or any computer games or any gaming on the Steam platform, that's Valve. They're a private company. We don't know how much money they make every year. It's in the 10 to 15 plus $billion. But they say this in their company employee handbook that you can download online. You can find it. It's very famous. When you're an entertainment company that recruits the most intelligent, innovative, and talented people on earth, telling them to sit at a desk and do what they're told to do obliterates 99% of their value. How many times have you run that 3 or 4 day briefing of a company, you've hired these amazing people, and you tell them how to sit in certain parts of the organization and do things in certain kinds of way? Valve's interesting. On day one, they give you a desk on wheels, and they say, go and find a team to work with or start to build something your own and find people to bring into your team. And it works. Is this going to work for everyone? No. But is this an interesting and poignant idea about a transcendence beyond what we are? Absolutely it is. What if we nurture flexible career paths and workplaces to attract the best talent? This is important as doing mobility the right way. And as we jump in to think about the technological and the capability side of mobility futures, it gets super interesting to me. Now, I chatted to Hannah Richardson from Server, incredible person. I was chatting to her again last night. I said, there's a quote from you in the presentation, so here you go, Hannah. You can breathe deeply now. Fine. We're moving the most expensive and valuable part of our client's business, and it just hit me as something so very important about the value of humans in the ecosystem, right? And the investment that we make, and that the world is not going to stop turning, and that the corporate relocation service market is actually growing very healthily. People are still going to want to move. No matter what we see in the news and the dynamics that play out, people still want to move with great companies and within their countries and beyond their countries as well. And the idea of mobility as a benefit came up in all the conversations with all of the server folks that I interviewed, and I interviewed several folks, and thank you for that. Because when you start to do this work and you start to think about futures, you have to get a sense of how it is today as a baseline. And I can tell you, the progressive thinking was very, very impressive. But mobility as a benefit starts to get unpacked. Like, what does that mean? What could it be? Mobility hubs that are powered by AI, proactive workforce mobility planning, talent as a service models, sustainable decarbonized relocation logistics. I could talk about the others, but a lot of different new capabilities are coming into the mix. And as a futurist, it's like, what comes next? Ideas like this, you can play with it to see what that becomes. But I come from marketing, I come from advertising. I love a good funnel-based model or a cyclical model as well. This is kind of a riff on what David Armano, great marketing thinker, starts thinking. And it just pointed to me as like, we focus on the employee and what they need. And then I think going forward, we build layers of connection and relocation about getting that onboarding and productivity, boosters at the beginning of your time in the organization is just right, because that really ignites innovation. But what keeps it going and builds loyalty and affinity is the business and community support. And community is so, so very important as well. Because when you're working in an organization, even if you're part of a team and you're part of an existing part of an organization that's doing well or has challenging times or whatever, it's the community, it's the people, it's the friendships that bring us through. So this accretive layered model of support, I think, is going to become incredibly important over the years. What do you do today to support all of those? And is it done in a holistic way? And it's going to be really supported by mobility wisdom. That's what we have here in spades, right? And mobility platforms. And we have some already, and there's going to be new ones coming. But really, more than anything else, partnership, fulfillment, and feedback, the ability to learn from each other and to build that capability is going to really start to change the game. And this could be a whole new realm of jobs within the mobility field as well. So geopolitical analysts, global compliance navigators, global mobility AI specialists. And I like to think that you're all kind of mobility futurists at this point, right? Because you're starting to see the signals and the trends and the dynamics that are going to start to play out in your organizations. You're getting that preparedness of what might come next. Because the things that I tell you today, you're going to start seeing more and more out in the real world. It's the Baader-Meinhof phenomenon, right? So what if we create an ecosystem of global mobility support? I think we're already there in part, and I think that we've got an opportunity to grow that going forward. But as we sort of wrap up the keynote and we start to think about the final piece of the 4 steps of the signals and the trends and the scenarios, we think about storytelling. But we also have to have some checks and balances as well. Now, I've talked about a lot of technology and speculations of what might come next. But really, is that going to be true, Nick? Can I discount some of this? Well, something has proven to be true over the years with technology and related subjects. Roy Mara's out of the Institute of the Future came up with the Mara's Law. In the short term, we tend to overestimate the impact of technology, the hype. But generally, in the long term, we tend to underestimate the impact of technology. Blockbuster underestimated the internet. Kodak invented the digital camera. Right? Toyota doesn't believe that electric vehicles are going to be the future. That's one to watch. And it's really interesting to see some of these poignant ideas around what might happen and what comes next. But the bottom line is, our human expectations don't change. They keep rising, and so they should. So as we start to really look at the signals of change, we start to really understand the trends that are going to impact us and look at the dynamics through scenarios. The stories, as I said, help us feel what comes next. Now, I'm really lucky in my career. I get to write science fiction for clients. I get to watch movies and read books. We might have even seen, movies like Her about human relationships and AI, or passing the Turing test in emotional ways with Ex Machina, or Gattaca, places where you can only get to work if you're genetically superior. I mean, some of these are dystopic, some of these are very positive, they're very human stories. So you're already doing your research by watching programs like Severance. Hands up who loves Severance. Oh my God, oh my God. I just binge watched it 2 weeks and I can't stop talking about it. Anyway. But what's really powerful is taking an idea and making it a little bit real. Now, I work with a great friend of mine, Dre LeBray, and we came up with this idea. I went down to Disney, I did a presentation on the future of entertainment and dynamics, and I said, hey, what if there's Afro Disney in multiple countries across Africa, and that becomes a whole new way of working? And everyone's like, why do the Mickey Mouse ears have solar panels? Aha! This is design fiction. Why, there's a brochure for Afro Disney that talks about food and new places to explore together. Design fiction creates questions so you can start to investigate what a future state could be like. We already know that Africa is going to be a dominant place in the next 50 to 100 years. Right? I did some work with companies like Google that ended up investing billions of dollars in Africa. And it really just gets the juices flowing, the creativity. And I've been really lucky in my career to have worked with a number of different places and companies and people that really are related to mobility. Now, I worked with YVR Airport in Vancouver, and they said, we want you to come in and we want to build engagement with people to tell us what the next 20 years might be like. I said, can I write science fiction? The CEO looked at me and said, sure. I wrote 5 science fiction stories, and we put it together in a video like this, and we invited people in for public consultations.
Plans for the future of YVR are taking shape. Our 2037 master plan is a blueprint for an airport that'll continue to reflect the best of BC. Sustainable, welcoming, and diverse. YVR will be a feast for the senses, a hive of activity and interaction, a business hub for entrepreneurs, and a unique retail experience that is second to none. Help shape the future of our world-class sustainable airport by attending public meetings and sharing your input online.
I'm sure we go out to our communities, we go out to our partners, we go out to our customers, and we say, can you come and tell us what you think? Now, in this particular case, we set up 6 public consultations. They got oversubscribed. We ended up doing about 16 across 3 different cities in the Lower Mainland in British Columbia. And they've never seen such a large uptake of involvement and engagement and whole new ideas. Why? Because the idea of giving someone a future to reflect their own opinion and understanding against is incredibly poignant. It's incredibly powerful, and it sort of really evokes a reaction. What's interesting about this is that one of my stories had this big vertical farm in the concourse and whatever, and a friend of mine sent me a video of Terminal D and their international departures where they built it. There was about 4 years in between this, but this isn't a vertical farm, but it's a glassed-in island forest. There's augmented reality, there's experiences, it's deeply calming. Not all airports are like this, I understand. If you go to YVR, it's a beautiful airport and it wins tons of awards. But not only this idea, but many other ideas came to fruition, and it came because people dared to wonder what came next, and what if the world changes, and what if we can redefine what an airport experience is like. But really, there's a reminder as we sort of wrap up the keynote. And I'm going to be around afterwards for some conversation, so feel free to come and ask me questions. But futures work starts now, starts in the present day. There's no risk in doing futures work because it's speculative. It's on paper. You might spend some time. You might have some teams doing some projects. But you're not going to break the organization by wondering what comes next. But what you're going to do is create a preparedness. You're either part of the plan for the futures that play out, or you're passive and you're watching them and they affect you, right? Change is inevitable. You either change or change happens to you is a mantra that I've been speaking about a lot over the years. But we can do a number of things. Number one, I think you need to question your own history and perspectives. How it's always been done is a great destroyer of organizations. In a world where the S&P 500 average age is less than 18 years old for a company, we don't want to be one of those ones that hits 17, 18 years and disappears. We want to be thriving. We want to be hundreds of years old, right? Number 2, look for pockets of future in the present. I've kind of showed you some ideas and some signals and some trends. You're going to start to see more of those around the world as you walk around and see what's happening. And you start digging into the signals that you're interested in. Number 3, be wildly creative and collaborate. You can have really great ideas on your own or in the small teams that you create. You can have bigger and better and brighter ideas when you start to share that with the world and you get people to reflect off of that and to build things together, right? It's always been the way, and it's often ignored in modern business. And number 4, shift your mindset from what is to what if for at least part of your day. So you can build that preparedness, so you can build that vigilance and that capability of being mobility futurists. And just to remind you, the new business capability and skill set that really is a game changer is the imagination that you have and that you continue to build to look outside the lines. The anticipation that you build for what comes next and how you can be prepared for growth and change and resiliency and security and such like. And the depth of empathy that we have within our teams, across our teams, with our partners, and with the people that we serve and we move around the world as well. As a final note, I'm going to leave you with a couple of things. Number 1, I'm going to leave you with a challenge. It's a 3-day Futures challenge. I want you to take something that you've seen today or a couple of things that you've seen today, and I want you to put them together and see, how they interact and how that might affect your job or your business. And I want you to think about the trends that emerge. And I want you to talk to someone about that over the next couple of days. Share your ideas and get some thoughts together. And then start to wonder, what if that does actually fundamentally change how we operate? I've also created an online resource for you. I run futurist.com. That's where myself and my think tank are. There's a page there for you specifically that just gives you some hints and tips and some tools to start thinking about futures. There's some really useful podcasts and the such like there as well, of things that I think are really smart people to listen to as well. So you can go to that. I'll make sure that the slides are available, that links are available for you to go to take a look at that. My name's Nick Badminton. I'm a futurist that stepped into the world of mobility. You're all mobility futurists. I'm going to be around. Come and talk to me. Thank you so much. Cheers.